to make a snowman. With coal eyes, an old green hat and scarf, and a tangerine nose, the snowman is perfect. James can hardly bear to go inside that evening and leave him. But in the middle of the night, he wakes and creeps out to see his snowman again, and to his amazement, the snowman comes to life. Raymond Briggs, the snowman, has been a festive favorite for 40 years, beautifully reimagined and retold by master storyteller Michael Morpurgo. This remarkable novel shares the magic with a whole new generation. Yes, so should we get to it? Yes. Let's have a look. The Snowman. For Mac and Edna and Searmaid and Stuart, remembering all the happy Christmases, MM. Here are the pictures. There's the snowman. Here's James, Mum and Dad, Bertie the dog, Grandma, Father Christmas, and Snowman. Chapter 1. Once upon a Christmas, there was a little boy called James. James lived with his mum and dad and Bertie, their sheepdog, on a farm deep in the countryside. They had cows and pigs and sheep and hens and ducks and geese, and they had a horse they called Big and a donkey they called Little. When James looked out of his bedroom window, which he did a lot because that's where he did most of his dreaming, he could see his dad's shed at the bottom of the garden, the weedy duck pond, his mum's vegetable patch, the swing and the trampoline that Grandma had given him the Christmas before. And beyond the garden hedge, he could see fields. Oak Tree Field was his favorite, because that was where the owl hooted from. There were so many fields on the farm, and hedges and trees, more than he could count, and a river running along the bottom of the valley like a silver ribbon. And beyond the river, high on the horizon, were the rolling hills of the moor. Pretty. See the trampoline, and the houses, trees, moor, tracked from his bedroom window. Grandma always came for Christmas. She often said, and she didn't say things too often sometimes, that mostly you couldn't see the hills around the farm because it was raining, but if you could see them, that meant it was going to rain soon or snow. Grandma, who lived in a town, didn't mind the rain and snow as much as the birds that woke her up early every morning, or the smell of pigs and cows that James often brought back into the house on his wellies when he had been out on the farm. She didn't much like green either, and of course there was a lot of green about in the countryside. What Grandma liked best was when James had had a bath and was all nice and clean, and in bed in his nice clean pajamas, as Grandma always called his pajamas. She loved sitting on his bed and telling him a story before he went to sleep. And at Christmas time, Once the tree was decorated downstairs in the sitting room. Once they had put up the holly and mistletoe, and once she had made the mince pies. Her favorite story was The Snowman by Raymond Briggs. You can see there they're sitting. Yeah, looks cozy, doesn't it? Well, one night after James had had his snowman story, Grandma said goodnight, hugged him tight, and as usual told him not to let the bedbugs bite. Bertie came up and jumped on his bed to say goodnight, as he often did, if he could get away with it. When Mom and Dad came up, they shooed Bertie off the downstairs, and then kissed James goodnight and snuggled him down. Mom told him to be a good little boy and go to sleep, because Father Christmas only brought the Christmas presents you really wanted if you were a good little boy. The trouble was, James didn't feel like being a good little boy and going to sleep at all. He was far too excited about Christmas. It was coming closer and closer. The next day was Christmas Eve, and then Father Christmas would be coming to see him. He wouldn't be hitching up his team of reindeer to the sledge, piling it high with presents, and setting off round the world, riding through the skies, the reindeer galloping, their bells jingling, to drop off presents to all the children in every country on earth. Christmas was coming. Yay! And if that wasn't exciting enough, James kept thinking about the story Grandma had just told him. He loved that story so much and was always sad when it was over. He longed to see snow outside his window, wanted the snowman story to happen again. But every time he looked out, there was no snow. There had to be snow, he thought, or there would be no snowman. Time and again he sat up in bed to see if any snow was falling. He went over to the window and pressed his face up against the glass to have a better look, to wish for snow to come. But all he saw was darkness. In the end he gave up, got back into bed, turned on to his sleeping bag, sighed and put his thumb in his mouth as he always did, then closed his eyes and pretended to go to sleep. And he was snuggled into bed here. Lovely. Chapter 2. James often found that if he pretended hard enough and squeezed his eyes tight shut, he would really make things happen. So now, because for Christmas he wanted a mountain bike with big fat tires, a bright green one like Paul Millard had, he knew he had to pretend to go to sleep like a good little boy, as Mum had told him. James liked Paul Millard. He had always wanted to be best friends with him. James didn't have a best friend, and he knew why. James stuttered and stammered. He always did whenever he opened his mouth and tried to speak. So at school it was better not to speak. Not if he couldn't help it. It was all right at home. For a start, he didn't stammer and stutter so much at home. And anyway, Mom and Dad never teased him. Open his mouth at school and someone was sure to snigger or mimic him, or laugh out loud. He kept quiet, kept himself to himself. It's not easy to make friends if you do that. So James spent most of the time on his own, and that made him sad. He tried not to think about that. He thought about Paul Millard's bright green mountain bike with big fat tires instead. It made him happier. James pretended as hard as he could to go to sleep like a good little boy. He really wanted Father Christmas to come and bring him that bike. He pretended so well that he soon pretended himself fast asleep. And there's the beautiful bike that you would like. Yes. James didn't know it, but outside as he slept, the snow did begin to fall, silently, silently, on the garden, on the duck pond, on his swing and on his trampoline, on the fields and the hedges and the trees, down on the river and up on the moor. All night the snow came floating down, all night he slept. Wow, snow everywhere. So the moment James opened his eyes, he knew the world was different, but at first he couldn't work out why. He sat up and looked out of the window. It wasn't day, it wasn't night. If it was morning already, it wasn't a morning like any other. The stars and moon were still up there, so it must still be night. But it was as bright as day. Snow, it had snowed everywhere. Beautiful. Silence lay like a blanket over the house, over the farm, and everywhere it was white. The roof of his dad's shed was white. The seat of the swing, Mum's vegetable garden, Dad's tractor, which he must have forgotten to put away again, were white. All the barns and fields and trees, the distant moors under the moon, all were silent and white. James was still half asleep and muddle-headed, so it was a few moments before he could take it all in, and a few more before he could even begin to believe his eyes. It looked like snow, but no snow was falling. Could it really be snow? Was this a dream? There was only one way to find out. He pulled on some clothes over his pajamas, his trousers, and the thick red jumper his mum had put out for him, the one he always wore at Christmas. He quickly got out the door. Not wanting to wake anyone, he knew he was up too early and that they would send him back to bed if they caught him. He tiptoed out of his room and down the stairs, which seemed to creak out more loudly than they had ever creaked before. By the back door he put on his wellies. Bertie wanted to come with him. He sat there in his basket looking up at him, head on one side, begging to be let out. Any moment now he would start squeaking and whining and then barking. James crouched down. "All right, Bertie," he whispered. But if you could come with me, not a sound right, promise?" Bertie licked his lips. It wasn't exactly a promise, James thought, but it was as good as he was going to get. Yay! So now we're going on to chapter 3. James opened the door, and then they were out in it, out in the marvelous moonlight white of it, in the still and silence of it. This was snow, all right, proper deep crunchy snow, the real thing, snow like neither James nor Bertie had ever seen before. Bertie ran off at once to explore, following his nose as he always did, wagging his tail wildly, but to James' great relief, not barking. The snow seemed to have silent Bertie too. James trucked off through the snow, down past the weedy duck pond towards the bottom of the garden, and opened the gate out into oak tree field beyond. Here he was far enough from the house not to be seen. Now he could do as he pleased, jump up and down in the snow, roll down the hill in it, cavorted and somersault and frolic in it. Bertie did the same. Look, they're all running down. James swung on the oak tree's lowest branch, and the snow fell down the back of his neck. He stomped around the tree in a great wide circle, leaving deep footprints behind him in the snow. Breathless with the fun of it, he stood there looking all around, admiring the circle of footprints he had made. Look, there's footprints around the tree. That was when a sudden brilliant thought came into his head. He knew at once what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. All thoughts of Christmas and presents and Father Christmas, even thoughts of the bright green mountain bike, had vanished. Nothing mattered to James now but the snow and the huge snowman he had just decided he was going to make. Now, right now. He began by making a snowball, just a small one, but squeezed tight in his hands till it was hard. Then he got down on his knees in the snow and began to roll it along, slowly at first into a bigger one, which became an even bigger one, as big as a football now. Even this was not quite big enough, he thought. Not yet. So he rolled it until it was the perfect size for what he had in mind. Look, Betsy's looking down on it. Huge snowball he's going to make. Wagging his tail. Bertie came leaping across the field, tongue hanging out, well whirling. Watch, Bertie, James told him. Sit and watch. And so he did. So Bertie sat and watched as James finished his giant snowball and began to build a huge tower of snow, packing it higher and higher till it was above his head, as high as he could reach. Then he was trimming and patting down the sides so that it was just right. But now he had a problem. It was too tall, too high. Bertie was looking up at him, head on one side, as if to say, "Now, what are you going to do, clever Clucks? You need a ladder, don't you?" James ran back to his dad's shed and fetched the step ladder. Putting a ladder up in the snow isn't easy because it keeps sinking when you stand on it, but James managed. Climbing it wasn't easy either, especially when carrying a huge snowball. But after a wobble or two, James managed to do that as well. Gently, carefully, he lowered the snowball. Look, he climbed all the way up the ladder and tried to place the smaller snowball on top of the big one. Bertie's looking at it, and the moon is up in the sky. Into place and began packing snow round it so that it stayed there and didn't fall off. That done, he climbed down the ladder again and stood back to look up and admire his snowman, who had a proper head. He wasn't finished, but he was already brilliant, the biggest and the best snowman James had ever seen. Bertie must have thought he was some kind of a giant, because he suddenly began barking his head off and couldn't stop. He ran round and round the snowman, yelling and yapping in wild excitement. James ran after him, trying to catch him, to calm him down. But Bertie wasn't going to be caught. He was telling this huge white giant of a stranger just what he thought of him, as loudly as he could. From the stables, Big was nicking, Little was braying, the ducks were quacking from the pond, the sheep bleating from the barn, and soon the pigs and cows were joining in. It was a whole animal chorus. The lights went on in the farmhouse. "Oh, thanks a lot, Bertie," Jim said. "Look what you have started. You've woken everyone up, Mum, Dad and Grandma." So, of course, it wasn't long before Dad came running out into the field. "What's going on? What's all the rackets about? What are you doing out here, James?" he said, and he sounded really cross. But he noticed the snowman. "Wow, what a lovely snowman you built that." "All by myself," James said proudly. "Well, he's a great snowman," Dad said proudly, too. "But if you ask me, he needs eyes and a nose and a mouth and a hat. You can have my old hat if you like. It's in the shed. Come along." He didn't seem at all crossed anymore. He took James's hand and walked him back through the snow. "Mum's a bit upset, you know. It's Grandma. All that terrible racket and hula-baloo from the farmland. Quite a noise the animals make. Woke us all up. Then we discovered you weren't in your bed, and we looked everywhere for you. But I wasn't that worried. Once glanced out of the window, and I knew you'd be out in the snow. I was a boy once, you know, but I never built such a magnificent snowman. Massive. He's taller than I am." "You won't tell anyone about my snowman, will you, Dad?" "No, not until he's finished. I want him to be a surprise." Well, let's hope so. Chapter 4. Dad didn't say a word. At breakfast, he just smiled a few secret smiles at James across the kitchen table, just winking a few winks. James had never eaten breakfast so fast in all his life. He never said a word. He was too busy eating, and while he was eating, he was working out what he would need to finish building his snowman. He gobbled down his cereal, gulped down his milk, wolfed down his toast, giving the crusts sneakily to Bertie under the table, because when Grandma came to stay, she always made him eat his crusts, which he didn't like at all. Besides, giving them to Bertie helped him finish up his breakfast even faster. "Finished," he said, and he was off. "Don't forget to wrap up warm," Grandma said. "Your nice green scarf, the one I knitted for you, and your woolly gloves, and make sure you put on your thick socks inside those willies. And don't forget my old hat. It's in the shed," Dad called out after him. "Got to keep warm out there." James knew well enough who he was talking about, who the hat was for, but no one else did. He loved having secret with his dad. He was glad Dad had reminded him about the old hat. He had forgotten all about it. He did put on the green scarf, but he didn't bother with anything else. On his way out, James went to the ladder and found everything he thought he would need for his snowman. A tangerine, some apples, and a handful of those horrible Brussels sprouts that only Grandma liked. Then he picked up a couple of pieces of coal from the coal shed. These were all just perfect for what James had in mind. So, his pockets stuffed with fruit and vegetables and coal, James stomped out across the garden, fetched Dad's old hat from the shed, and they went out into the field. Bertie ran on ahead of him and was already prowling around the giant snowman, growling. Oh, how exciting. "It's all right, Bertie," James told him. "He won't hurt you. I know he looks a bit strange at the moment, but you just watch. I'm going to make him the happiest, friendliest snowman ever. Watch." So Bertie sat and watched as James climbed up to the very top of the ladder. He had to, so that he could reach. The ladder wobbled a bit, but James didn't mind. He took off his dad's hat and put it on the snowman's head. It fitted perfectly. He had 2 nice little apples for the ears. They looked just the right shape, ear-shaped. James pushed them in quite deep, so they stayed there. And then he pulled the hat down, low like his dad did, so you couldn't see them anymore. That way they would be warm. With those ears, the snowman would be able to understand everything we're saying, Bertie. You will see, said James. By now he could hardly feel his fingers or his feet, but he didn't mind. There was still so much to do. No, he told Bertie, taking the tangerine out of his coat pocket and showing him it. It's got to be an orange nose, because orange is my favorite color. He stuck it in as hard as he could. Now the snowman had his own bright orange nose, which suited him perfectly. There, that won't fall off, will it? And look, it's a lovely nose. He will be able to smell with it, won't he? You can't live without a nose, can you, Bertie? Bertie swished his tail in the snow and yawned, and licked his lips, which he often did when he agreed. Now he's got to have eyes so he can see us, James said, taking the 2 pieces of coal out of his pocket. Look, Bertie, he's going to have black eyes, smiling black eyes. He will be happy with those, won't he? But the snowman's face didn't look happy. Maybe he's cold, said James. You can't be happy if you're cold, can you, Bertie? He hasn't got many clothes on, has he? And that gave him another brilliant idea. He took off his green scarf, the one Grandma had knitted for him, reached out and tied it around the snowman's neck. He looked a little warmer, perhaps, but he still didn't seem much happier. James got down off the ladder, stood back, and looked up at his snowman. Bertie looked up at him too. Dad's old hat was keeping his head warm, and the scarf suited him fine. It looked grand on him, blowing in the wind, but James could now see that a scarf on its own wouldn't keep him really warm. He needs a coat, Bertie, James said, but he's far too big for any coat we have got at home, even Dad's. I mean, we don't need any giants, do we? But maybe if I gave him a pretend coat so that it looked really real, and he felt it was really real, then maybe that would keep him properly warm and may make him happy. What do you think, Bertie? Bertie put his head on one side as if to say, and he talked really well with his eyes. I think a coat is just what the snowman needs, but it must have buttons so he can do it up. Lots of buttons. You still got Grandma's horrible Brussels sprouts in your pocket, haven't you? They'd do fine as buttons, a lot better than eating them, that's for sure. You're a genius, the dog, Bertie, Jim said, crouching down to give him a cuddle. Then up the ladder he went again. He took all the Brussels sprouts out of his pocket and, starting at the top near the snowman's neck, came slowly down the ladder, giving his snowman Brussels sprout button after Brussels sprout button till he had, look all the way down, till he had none left. In the end, the snowman's coat had 5 buttons from the top to bottom, all of them as green as Brussels sprouts. Wow. Chapter 5. Are you ready for more? Yeah, you're not tired yet? Okay. Let's read chapter 5. But even when his new buttoned-up coat, the snowman still didn't look happy. That was when James heard his dad singing away in the milky parlor, and that was when he remembered something Mom sang to him sometimes. Mom and Dad both liked singing it if ever he was feeling a bit sad and miserable, as he was quite often on his way to school in the mornings. She had put her arm around him, wipe away his tears, and sing that song about when you are smiling and the world smiles with you. He liked her singing that song. It always cheered him up, for a while at least. That's it, Bertie, he cried, climbing the ladder again. He needs a smile, the snowman needs a smile, because smiling makes you happy, makes the whole world happy. A smile would be easy enough to make, he thought, and with his finger he drew a smile across the snowman's face, a huge wide curve of a smile, a happy smile. Bertie liked what he saw. He was barking, not wildly, but happily, his tail whirling. Then he started chasing it round and round, which he only did when he was especially happy. James climbed down the ladder, then stood back and looked up at his snowman. He liked what he saw too. With that smile on his face, his snowman was happy at last. So James smiled too and hummed his mum's song. Why, so beautiful. Smiley happy snowman listening. As he looked up at him, James decided that he loved his happy snowman more than anything, even more than Bertie, but he wasn't going to tell him that. And far more than a bright green mountain bike with big fat tires, but all the same he still hoped he'd get one for Christmas. There was so much to do that day. There always was on Christmas Eve. James kept asking Mom and Dad and Grandma to come out and see his surprise. He was longing to show everyone his snowman now that he was finished, but everyone was too busy. Grandma was busy mixing the chestnut stuffing for the turkey, and she had to get the Brussels sprouts ready too, so she couldn't come and look. Mom was busy giving the sheep the hay and feeding the hens and collecting the eggs and taking big and little out to their field, so she couldn't come and look. And Dad was busy with the cows and calves and pigs, and he said he had already seen the snowman, but he had come as soon as he could. But he didn't come and look either. So that afternoon, feeling a bit sad, James took Bertie out to Oak Tree Field, where his snowman stood waiting for him. James said hello and told him why his family couldn't come and meet him yet. They would later, he said, when they weren't so busy. As he talked, he patted down the snow where it had fallen away a bit and tried to put back all the Brussels sprouts buttons that had fallen off, but only 3 would stay in. James hoped would be enough to keep his coat on. Then he went sliding down the hill on his bottom to show the snowman how fast he could go. That soon cheered him up, and the snowman seemed to like it too. James even thought he heard him laughing once, a deep booming laugh, a jolly laugh, like no one else's. James needed to talk to the snowman. He wanted to get to know him better. So he rolled himself another big snowball, made it flat on top, and then he sat down it right in front of the snowman. Sitting there on his snow chair, James told the snowman all about himself. Well, not all, just the interesting things like his best toys and Paul Millard, who he wanted as his best friend, and the green mountain bike, and how he wished he could stop stuttering and stammering because everyone at school laughed at him. And then he told him that his favorite foods was raspberry jelly and that he hated Brussels sprouts. The snowman smiled and listened quite happily, so that cheered James up. Something else was cheering him up too, but he couldn't think what it was, though he still felt a little sad that everyone was too busy to come and look at his surprise snowman. Right, that's gonna be the last chapter before your bedtime, honey. So I'll read chapter 6. Okay? Good. He was just telling the snowman how much he wanted a green mountain bike like Paul Millard's for Christmas when he heard the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow behind him. He turned round. They were all there, Mum, Dad and Grandma. "We've come to see you. You're surprised," said Dad. "Wow, wow, wow," said Mum, gazing up at the snowman in wonder. "Amazing, and the best thing about him is his smile." "He's magnificent, James," said Grandma, reaching out to touch the snowman. "He's wonderful, almost like he's real, like he's living and breathing. I love those 3 lovely coat buttons too. Do you mind? I thought I was missing a few Brussels sprouts still on cold days like this. You've got to keep yourself buttoned up, even if you're a snowman." James skipped through the snow all the way back to the house. He was so happy that they all loved his snowman as much as he did. He fell over a few times because it's not easy to skip in the snow. They all laughed at that, and Percy joined in, barking his head off. And then he... Oh, look at that lovely picture. They're watching the snowman, all of them. Chased his tail again. Say they all laughed some more. Their laughter echoed out over the fields around them. Big, I'm going to hold it like this, big and little neighed and prayed from their field, and soon all the animals seemed to be joining in. The whole farm rang with laughter, and James was sure he could hear his snowman laughing too, a deep booming laugh, a jolly laugh like no one else's. James wanted to spend the whole afternoon with his snowman out in Oak Tree Field, but they wouldn't let him. "You were out there all morning," James said. "Mum, it's bitter out there," said Grandma. "You will catch a cold. You stay in the warm and help your grandma. There's plenty to do. You could start by fetching in the logs for the fire." "Don't worry," said Dad, already laughing. With Dad, you could always tell when a joke was coming. Your snowman will be fine out there. It doesn't matter much if a snowman gets cold, does it? He pestered them and pestered them, so in the end they let him go out again, just before dark, to say goodnight to the snowman. He looked very lonely standing out there all on his own. "Sleep well, Mr. Snowman," James said, looking up at him. "I will dream about you and you dream about me. Then you won't be lonely, will you? Christmas Day tomorrow, Father Christmas might bring me my new bright green mountain bike. That's if I'm a good little boy," Mum says. "Then we could go for a ride on it together, couldn't we? Got to go. Don't want to. But it's tea time, and I promised Mum I'd be back inside before she could count to 500. And James walked through the snow back to the house, feeling on top of the world. That night it was Mum's turn to read him a story. James said he wanted the snowman, but Mum said he always wanted that one, and he had a snowman of his own now, which was a lot better than a story about one. And anyway, she wanted to read him her favorite Christmas story, which was The Night Before Christmas. It was quite good, but not as good as The Snowman. But he didn't tell Mum that. Afterwards, Dad and Grandma came up, and he had more hugs as usual. Grandma told him not to let the bedbugs bite, and Dad said he mustn't try to stay awake to see Father Christmas come creeping into his room with all the presents to fill up his stocking. Dad laid out the stockings on the end of James's bed. It's empty now, he said, but you go to sleep like a good little boy, and when you wake up, it will be full of presents you will see. And then they were all gone, and James was alone. He hated being alone at school. He was alone in his bedroom now, but that was all right. Somehow he never felt alone at home, not in the same way. He thought of his snowman alone in the field. The owl hooted. Oh, weet. They don't go to weet, to at all, James thought. And that owl is alone too, and he stutters and stammers as well. Maybe that's why I like owls. But then he thought none of us is alone. Not really. Sometimes we think we are, but I know the owl is out there, and I know the snowman is out there, and there are voices downstairs, so I am alone anyway. Let me just go back. I just need to check what it says. There are voices downstairs, so I'm not alone anyhow. Not really. James liked thinking and dreaming were his two favorite things. And that is what you are going to do now as well. So I'm going to put book here, and then we'll read it again tomorrow. So, good night, sweetie. Have sweet dreams. And remember, I love you. And I'll see you in the morning. I'm going to turn off the lights.